Beck Weathers. On the night of May 10, 1996, a brutal storm swallowed Everest. Among those trapped high above the world was Beck Weathers, a 49-year-old pathologist from Texas. Hours earlier, a rare condition triggered by the extreme altitude had caused him to lose his vision almost completely. Blind and disoriented, he struggled in the freezing darkness until his strength gave out. Near the south summit, Beck collapsed into the snow. By morning, his body was frozen stiff, his face covered in ice, his hands locked into lifeless claws. Climbers who passed him believed he was gone and moved on, whispering quiet goodbyes. But hours later, something unbelievable happened. Beck opened his eyes. He was still blind. His skin was black with frostbite. The wind roared around him like a living thing, and every breath burned his lungs. And yet, somehow, he stood up. Step by step, he stumbled alone through waist-deep snow, fighting hurricane-force winds and oxygen-starved air until he reached Camp 4. He survived when no one believed he could, but the price was unimaginable. Beck lost both hands, his nose, and much of his face to frostbite. Lincoln Hall. In 2006, Australian climber Lincoln Hall collapsed near the summit after reaching it without supplemental oxygen. Exhausted, hypoxic, and barely conscious, his Sherpas tried to drag him down, but his body gave out completely. Believing him dead, they reported his passing over the radio and left him behind in the death zone. That night, Lincoln lay alone at nearly 28,000 feet. No oxygen, no tent, no food, and no hope. But the next morning, climbers from another expedition, led by Dan Mazza, spotted a surreal sight on the ridge. There, sitting cross-legged in the snow without gloves or a hat, was Lincoln Hall. His skin was grey with frostbite, and he was mumbling to himself. When they approached, he looked up and said calmly, "You're surprised to see me, aren't you?" Abandoning their summit attempt, Mazza's team spent hours giving him oxygen, warm drinks, and slowly guiding him back to safety. Against all odds, Lincoln Hall survived after spending an entire night in the death zone. Yasuko Namba, a 47-year-old climber from Japan, fulfilled her lifelong dream on May 10, 1996 by becoming the oldest woman at the time to reach Everest's summit. But joy quickly turned to tragedy. On the descent, Yasuko and her teammates were caught in the same deadly storm that trapped Beck Weathers and guide Rob Hall. Exhausted, frostbitten, and barely able to move, she collapsed just a few hundred feet from Camp 4, salvation within sight. Her teammates tried to help, but the hurricane winds, whiteout conditions, and chaos of the night made it impossible. Yasuko was left behind, and she died there, so close to safety. Everest gave her the summit, and then took everything back. Kazakh mountaineer Anatoly Bukriv was one of the guides for Scott Fisher's Mountain Madness team during the 1996 disaster. He climbed without supplemental oxygen, a controversial decision that drew heavy criticism at the time. But that choice may have saved lives. When the storm struck, Bukriv descended quickly, rested briefly at camp, and then went back into the blizzard to rescue others. Throughout the freezing night, he dragged half-conscious climbers out of the snow and guided them to safety, risking his own life again and again. Several people survived because of him. Bukriv's actions eventually earned him respect as one of the heroes of that terrible night, but fate was merciless. Just 1 year later, Anatoly died in an avalanche on Annapurna. On Everest, though, his name remains synonymous with courage. Green Boots, the man in the cave. At around 27,900 feet on Everest's northeast ridge lies a small limestone alcove known among climbers as Green Boots Cave. Inside, for almost 2 decades, rested the frozen body of a climber wearing bright green mountaineering boots, curled up against the rock. Most believe it was Tsewang Paljor, an Indian climber who died in the 1996 blizzard. Over time, his body became an unintentional landmark. Exhausted climbers would stop there to rest, sip oxygen, and gather strength for the final push. Some left bottles of oxygen beside him. Others passed in silence, pretending not to look. In 2014, his body was quietly moved out of sight. But the cave remains, a haunting reminder that on Everest, death is so common, even the fallen become part of the route itself. Hristo Prodanov. In 1984, Bulgarian climber achieved one of the boldest feats in Everest history, a solo ascent via the West Ridge, one of the mountain's most dangerous and least traveled routes, and he did it without supplemental oxygen. He reached the summit late in the evening, around 6:30 p.m., and radioed his team, saying he planned to descend immediately. But as darkness fell, a storm rolled in. Hristo spent the night exposed to the elements in the death zone. alone. No tent, no sleeping bag, no oxygen. The next day, his exhausted voice crackled over the radio. "I see the tents. I'm coming, but I'm very tired." Those were his last words. He never made it back. His body was never recovered. To this day, Hristo's climb is remembered as one of the most extreme solo attempts ever made on Everest. Babuchiri Sherpa. Sherpa climber Babuchiri was a living legend. Over his career, he summited Everest 10 times and set multiple world records. In 1999, he spent 21 hours standing on the summit without bottled oxygen, a feat that stunned the mountaineering world. The following year, he climbed from base camp to the top in just 16 hours and 56 minutes. But even legends fall. On April 29, 2001, while photographing the mountain near Camp 2, Babu slipped into a hidden crevasse and died instantly. For the Sherpa community, his loss was immeasurable. He wasn't just a climber, he was proof of what the human body and spirit could endure. Marco Siffredi. French snowboarder Marco Siffredi dreamed of doing what no one had ever done, riding down Everest on a snowboard. In May 2001, he succeeded, carving his way down the north face via the Norton Couloir. But Marco wasn't satisfied. He wanted the ultimate line, the Hornbein Couloir, a steeper and far more dangerous descent. He returned in September 2002. On September 8th, he reached the summit, strapped into his snowboard, and dropped into the abyss. His Sherpas watched him carve the slope until he disappeared into the couloir and never came out. Despite search efforts, Marco was never found. His name became legend among extreme athletes, a reminder that some dreams demand more than anyone can give. Scott Fisher. On May 10, 1996, 40-year-old American guide Scott Fisher led his Mountain Madness team up Everest alongside Rob Hall's expedition. An elite climber who had summited numerous peaks without oxygen, Fisher was already feeling unwell before the final push. Despite exhaustion, he pressed on and reached the summit around 4 p.m., dangerously late in the day. On the descent, the storm struck with 70-mile-per-hour winds and temperatures plummeting to -40 degrees Celsius. Near the Hillary Step, Fisher collapsed from exhaustion and altitude sickness. His Sherpa tried to help, but was forced to leave him behind to save other clients. The next day, rescuers found Fisher's body, jacket unzipped, hands bare, oxygen mask gone. Disoriented by hypoxia and cold, he may have thought he was overheating. Scott Fisher's body remains on Everest to this day, frozen just off the main route. Rob Hall. That same day, Rob Hall, a 35-year-old New Zealand guide, led another team up Everest. Among his clients was Doug Hansen, a 46-year-old mailman attempting the summit for the second time after failing the previous year. Delays at the Hillary Step caused dangerous bottlenecks, and Hall's strict 2 p.m. turnaround rule was broken. Hansen struggled, and Hall refused to abandon him. At 4 p.m., hours past safety limits, Doug finally reached the summit. But by then, the storm had descended on the mountain. On the way down, Hansen collapsed after running out of oxygen. Hall stayed with him, refusing to leave his client behind. Trapped at nearly 28,700 feet, Hall radioed base camp through the night. By morning, Hansen was dead, and Hall himself was fading fast. In his final call, he spoke to his pregnant wife Jan, telling her he loved her and to take care of their baby. Shortly after, the radio went silent. Rob Hall died on May 11th, 1996, near the South Summit. His body remains there still, frozen into the mountain. The 1996 Everest disaster claimed 8 lives in a single day.